left engine fuel control switch did not stay locked in the run position. When light pressure was applied, it moved towards the cutoff. And this happened on 2 different occasions. On the 3rd try, it latched on properly. The pilots verified that it was secure, avoided unnecessary contact with the switch, monitored the engines closely, and completed the flight safely with no abnormal indications or warnings. But after landing in Bengaluru, the defect was reported, and Air India grounded the aircraft as a precaution. The airline referred the matter to Boeing, the manufacturer, for priority assessment and started precautionary fleet-wide checks on fuel control switches across its 33 Boeing 787s. This isn't just a random mechanical glitch. It's a haunting echo of June 2025. You remember the Ahmedabad tragedy, 260 lives lost when Air India Dreamliner plummeted just seconds after takeoff. And the preliminary report in that crash points to an uncommanded cutoff of both the engines. Now, just months later, we're seeing the exact same issue on the exact same model. The regulator, the DGCA, says their initial checks show these switches are mechanically secure. They are suggesting the issue might be how the pilots are handling the switches, calling it incorrect pressure on those fuel switches. But pilots' bodies are pushing back. They're asking, should a switch this critical be so temperamental? They want the entire fleet grounded for deep electrical checks, and they aren't alone. Global whistleblowers are now flagging over 2,000 reports of electrical surges and overheating in the Dreamliner fleet in the United States, Canada, Australia, and India. They have highlighted recurring electrical and avionics issues on the 787s worldwide, including surges. We're talking about short circuits, overheating, and power panel problems, with some alleging hidden design or manufacturing defects that Boeing may have downplayed. Big questions that we are asking on the segment tonight. Is it fair to blame pilot handling for a switch that is clearly prone to slipping out of its locked position? Is manufacturer Boeing downplaying a systemic risk to avoid a global grounding of their most popular long-haul jet? With me on the broadcast, Captain C.S. Randhawa, President, Federation of Indian Pilots, FIP India. Many thanks for taking out the time. And Captain Prashant Dhalla, former Flight Operations Inspector, DGCA. I'm going to quickly come to you first, Captain Randhawa. You know, if a safety lock fails twice, is this still about human error or about the machine? Isn't the DGCA here blaming the pilot? Pilots are trained for emergencies, but they're meant to compensate for mechanical safeguard that fails repeatedly. Twice, the fail switch moved to the cutoff position.
Kabir, you have covered everything in detail and absolutely correctly. Now, first and foremost thing, let me tell you, I am an examiner on the 777 aircraft, and I was one of the first persons to be converted onto Boeing 787. And this was before the induction. And I will tell you one thing in the fuel control switch, which is very, very evident. It's fitted on the 737 MAX also. The switch is spring-loaded. Now, when you pull the switch, you cannot, firstly, from the cutoff position, I can't move it to run or run to cutoff until unless I pull the switch. It's spring-loaded. So I have to pull the switch out and then put it up. And when I put it up, I release it, it will latch.
Okay.
Even if I use the hammer, it will not come to cutoff. So it is so well designed. It is designed by Honeywell. Honeywell is the supplier of the switches, and the life of these switches is 20,000 hours, and it's barely done 3,400 hours on this aircraft, which is about 20% of the time. So there is no reason for the switch to fail. Now, for the pilot having inadvertently moved the switch, I do not agree with that concept at all. The switch was not latching and it was dropping to cutoff. Only thing is that the Boeing has issued an advisory circular in July 25 after the Air India 171 crash, in which it laid the guidelines in case there is a malfunction found or an inadvertent movement of the fuel control switches.
Right.
which it says that for the pilot awareness, it says that if there is an uncommanded movement or there is looseness, any phase of the flight, and before the next sector, the flight is not to be operated. That means at London, I don't know what are the pressures on the captain, because in Air India or Indigo, any of these airlines, there are too much of pressures on the pilot or the flight engineer. They sack them for any reason, which they are not doing the line of the airline. So maybe under the pressure, the pilot has taken the aircraft to Bangalore. But if you go by the circular says this should have been actually recorded over there.
You're absolutely right.
Because
if I was on that flight, I would have made sure to move the court against the airline.
Yes. The fault is of the airline. The aircraft should have been grounded at Heathrow and investigated. You now, after completing the flight, what is the question of grounding the aircraft now? You have played around with 240 lives.
Well, all's well that ends well, Captain Randhawa. I'm glad that, all on board that AI 132 has safely landed in Bengaluru. Let me quickly bring in Captain Dhalla as well. Captain, this fuel switch has two-step safety lock. And correct me if I'm wrong anywhere. If it failed twice, that too in London, are we looking at a design vulnerability rather than an isolated event? I mean, of course, this does invoke the tragic memories of AI 171, but how do you read this now? This is so dangerous. I mean, any other Boeing 787 could be a flying casket at the moment. I think you'll have to unmute yourself, Captain.
That's right, sir.
Yeah.
A very important question has been raised, and I must comment on the amount of research has been done by News9 team. However, we must understand the difference for the sake of the viewers between a commanded position and an uncommanded position vis-a-vis a manual outcome and an automatic outcome. Like my senior Captain Randhawa has very categorically mentioned that how this particular switch, is into operation. The pilots who are trained professionals are being trained to use this switch time and again. They have repeated trainings. However, we must understand that we are talking about three bodies here. We're talking about the operator, we're talking about the regulator, or also we're talking about the manufacturer. Having said that, this particular instance involves two jurisdictions. One of a foreign land, which is United Kingdom right now, where this particular incident has happened. Secondly, the Indian DGCA. Now, when this particular matter gets involved in this particular instance, wherein that you have two particular jurisdictions, it is very, very essential that the government of India, the airline per se, must be on the same page. They must have a joint statement in this regard, wherein the sentiments of the public are kept at large and the safety should not be jeopardized in this particular case.
Okay. Captain Randhawa, is there a risk that investigators rushed into this pilot error narrative that we were talking about earlier and are now being forced to re-examine the hardware?
Absolutely right, Kabir. If you see Air India 171 crash, the AIB was heading towards, a pilot error. And without examining the electrical system, which you rightly pointed out in the findings of your part of the investigation. Now, if you see, this aircraft is highly dependent on the electrical system, right? And from the day one after the crash, we have been highlighting the need for investigations into the electrical and avionics part of the aircraft. There have been short circuiting, there have been flooding in the electronic bay. There have been n number of problems for this aircraft right from inception, from 2012 onwards. It is endless. And let me remind you that the first time there was a problem with this aircraft in fuel control switches was on 17th of Feb 2019, NI aircraft landing at Osaka. The aircraft remained in the air mode, and when it landed, when the pilots brought the throttle levers to idle and they took the reversers, fuel supply was cut off to both the engines.
Well,
this is the second time we have been saying that one of the causes could be that in this case also in a 171 crash, that the fuel has been cut off and the fuel control switches may not have moved.
Okay.
And it has picked up by the DFDR and they are corroborating that it could be pilot error. But this has happened, blessing in disguise yesterday, that this has happened on the ground before the engine, before the aircraft could taxi out.
Absolutely.
And we are going to file this in the court, Supreme Court. Our hearing is on 11th of February.
We hear you. Pertinent points. Captain Dalla, the final say on the segment. If a fuel switch that is designed not to move and then moves on its own, how alarming is that for the pilot? Let it be whatever stakeholder you're talking about, whether it's the operator, whether it's the regulator, whether it's the passenger. How alarming is that really?
It is something which is quite horrific for the pilot sitting inside the cockpit. However, I must say it on record that pilots are very trained individuals. They have a protocol, they follow their SOPs. And in this particular case, we must take it on face value that the pilot in command has filed a report, which is in black and white. And it is now the duty of the regulators and the manufacturer to advise and aid the particular airline and come out with a clean safety record for a Boeing 787, because this is a global phenomena. Like Captain Randhawa has very rightly mentioned, this affects the entire world. In terms of
it just makes one question, Captain Dalla, that after the 2025 AI-171 crash, inspections were carried out, and today we see a repeat incident of sorts. Were those checks too superficial? That's what people are asking.
You see, aviation is a very dynamic industry wherein things are not static. You will have these instances time and again. Having said that, something which is to do with safety should not be taken so lightly by the regulator or the operator, or for that matter, the manufacturer. There should be proper fact finding. And I'm sure the government of India would look into it deeply.
Well, we'll leave it there. Captain Dalla, Captain Randhawa, many thanks for taking out the time. It seems like quite a few questions remain unanswered. Is grounding one aircraft enough, or does aviation safety demand grounding? That's the question itself. If this had happened mid-air instead of on the ground, like the blessing in disguise both my panelists were talking about, would the outcome have been a little different? These are some questions for you to think about. Why does it take for a near miss for the systemic issues to then get attention? That's the question that we're going to leave you with here on In Your Interest. Many thanks for taking out the time. We'll see you again tomorrow.
जब 25 साल के प्रत्युष का किडनी का ऑपरेशन हुआ तो पॉलिसी बाजार की टीम ने हॉस्पिटल पहुंचकर 12 लाख का क्लेम अप्रूव करवाने में पूरी हेल्प की। पॉलिसी बाजार पर 1 करोड़ का हेल्थ इंश्योरेंस सिर्फ 550 रुपए महीने से शुरू।
With Skoda Supercare and growing network across 180 plus cities, you never drive alone.
Skoda. वकील साहब, अच्छी खासी प्रैक्टिस है, नया फील्ड में क्यों जाना?
सिस्टर, देश का सोच रहे
और इसके फ्यूचर का नहीं सोच रहे।
SBI लाइफ से अपनी बेटी का फ्यूचर सिक्योर है।
तभी तो इनको अपने इरादे पूरे करने का राइट है।
करो पूरे अपने इरादे,
अपनों से किए सभी वादे।
SBI लाइफ अपने लिए,
अपनों के लिए।
This is India's #1 news network, and you're watching News9, English news as it should be.
And let me go to the breaking news that is coming in. The breaking news is that the Manipur will very soon have a CM. Union Home Minister Amit Shah chaired a high-level meeting today as efforts gathered to place form of a new government in Manipur, where President's rule is set to expire next week. And what happened is Yumnam Khemchand will be next Manipur's CM. Yumnam Khemchand has been elected as the leader of the BJP Legislative Party. It creates precedent now or it creates the environment